All
Hey,
right. Welcome to
man.
the Domestic Draft Podcast. I'm Evan Bierman here with Dan Slowick. Dan, I see you're already sipping on your beer. What are you drinking today?
I have a brewery up by Sacramento. It's called Knee Deep Brewing Company, and it's their beautiful blonde. Very easy blonde ale, 4.5%, 3.44 on Untapped. Just a real easy. I've been saying it for a while. I've just been really liking like the pilsners, the blondes. Just very easy drinking beer at the moment. A little bit about the brewery. It's out near Sacramento, like I said, and it was founded in 2010. And for the first couple of years, they did contract brewing, so they didn't really brew on site. They were doing contract brewing out by Lake Tahoe here in California, and then they're doing some out in Reno, Nevada as well, and kind of just distributing out in those kind of west coast, western state area. And it wasn't until 2011, about a year later, they decided to kind of nix all that. And in Lincoln, California, they opened up their kind of own in-house brewery facility, and they've been doing in-house brewing ever since. I've never heard of this brewery, so I thought I'd bring it on the show. It's a little north from me, up in Sacramento, but it's a really easy, spring summer beer. No frills, no nothing, no hop flavor. Really, it's kind of just like a clear, crisp taste, man. What about you? What are you drinking?
Yeah, that sounds great. So I'm doing Riverlands Brewing Company. They're based out of St. Charles, Illinois. It's a St. Charles brewery, tap room, and patio that opened in 2019, and they focus on high quality ales and lagers. They're actually consistently rated best patio in St. Charles too, so they're known for their ambiance, fun events. They do tie-dye parties, bingo, karaoke, turtle races, trivia, all kinds of stuff like that. But they also have food trucks that they feature and live music, on a weekly basis. So the beer I have here is the 2023 Tranquil. It's an imperial stout aged for 18 months in Buffalo Trace bourbon barrels. It's 14.5%, so
Oh,
pretty heavy beer here. 4.36 on Untapped, great score. But I actually found this beer because I had the reserve version at Fobab, Festival of Barrel Aged Beer down in Chicago, and that beer was aged 19 months in Pappy Van Winkle bourbon barrels. I thought it was the best beer there. I met the head brewer there, Nick, great guy. So I went out and checked out the tap room, picked up some beer. Check out Riverlands Brewing Company if you're ever in the St. Charles, Geneva, Batavia area. It's one of my favorites for sure.
sounds good.
But somebody else that's consistently been rated one of the best in Chicago is David Haugh. He's our next guest. He's the co-host of Mully Haugh Show from 5:30 to 10 a.m. weekdays on 670 The Score. He's the host of NBC Sports Chicago's Football Night in Chicago, and you can find him on Twitter at David Haugh. David, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey guys, thanks for asking me. And you, Evan, have the perfect name for a beer brewery pod, craft beer pod. And I really appreciate the chance to talk Chicago sports with you. If that's what we're going to talk about, what are we going to talk about?
Yeah. Well, let's go back a little bit. I'm curious. We're both former college athletes, and so are you. You were a All MAC player in 1989, the academic All American as well, and both being athletes. All three of us being athletes. Just curious, what's your favorite part about playing football? What did you like most?
I am from that era. I played at Ball State University.
Mm.
What do I like? That's a very general question, but it's a very easy answer for me as you reflect and you get further away from it. What did I like about playing football? I liked the contact. I did like the contact. I was a free safety,
Mm-hmm.
and I grew up in a very small town in Northwest Indiana called North Judson. And football was everything. It was Friday Night Lights, and like the series and the movie, and everything revolved around high school football. And it was a great experience. I'm very nostalgic about those memories. So when I got out sounds like I was on parole, but when I ended up getting a scholarship to play at Ball State, a lot was new because I really all I wanted to do was to play college football. Actually, I wanted to be the shortstop for the Cubs, but when that kind of died out, I was on to play college football, and the more I was around it, the more I loved just the feel of everything about the game and the sport. And in those days, it was very physical, and I had a great career and a great experience. And yeah, we played in the California Razor Bowl, and the story that I tell is that my senior year, we were very good. We won the MAC.
Mm-hmm.
I was accepted at the Medill School of Journalism to get my graduate school. And I had a very good senior year. And part of me was flirting with the idea of trying to get in a tryout camp and talk to an agent who had been in touch and maybe be one of those guys that, spends the rest of his life telling his buddies about the 3 weeks he spent in training camp. And was it going to be professional football? Was it going to be graduate school? And then against Fresno State in the California Raisin Bowl on 2nd and 10, I was on the opposite hash. They completed a pass to the wide receiver, and he ran down the sidelines. And for the final 20 yards, I chased him into the end zone, and he got further away with every step. And it was on national television, and it was embarrassing. And we lost 26-12. And I tell people that was when I knew journalism was for me. Yeah. My journalism career began the very moment my football career ended, essentially. So it was an easy choice to make.
That's funny.
That was a good Fresno team, too. They had 6 players on the team go to the NFL.
Thank you.
And that guy, James Williams, was their first-round pick, played a couple of years. And then Ron Cox got drafted by the Bears.
How do you know this? Exactly. Ron Cox, J.D. Williams. J.D. Williams was the smoothest cornerback you'd ever seen in a bowl game like that. Ron Cox was, he was like already playing at an NFL level. And
he was like runner-up for the Butkus Award that year, I think.
That was a great Fresno State team, and we ran into a buzzsaw.
I was just wondering because, that team was pretty good. And then also the MAC conference and just people in the NFL that made it. Our own head coach, Matt Eberflus. Did you guys play each other?
Yes. Matt Eberflus was 2 years behind me. He played at Toledo, and he was a linebacker and I was a safety. I think he played as a freshman. I don't know how much he played in that game, but my senior year, we played at Toledo against them early in the season, and we lost. And my memory of that game, and I know Matt Eberflus played against us because I think some of my friends who were offensive linemen talked about blocking him when he got hired by the Bears. My lasting memory about that game was not Eberflus. It was intercepting a pass, thinking that I had done a good thing, running it back about 20 yards, and then fumbling it back to Toledo.
Oh, no.
So we lost that game, and I contributed to the loss more than I did anything else. But, I played against Matt Eberflus a couple times, and he's had some fun with that, calling me out once this year at the podium. And, I get accused on our radio show a little bit, or in good fun, about having a soft spot for Matt Eberflus because we have a very similar football background. When you come from the Midwest, he grew up in Ohio, I grew up in Indiana, and you play the MAC, you kind of relate to his football sensibilities.
Right.
And I do kind of relate to his football sensibilities. I don't know that that's going to change how much I criticize him or it has affected the amount that I will when they're 7-10 and worse last year, but I can relate to a lot of the way that he came into the game, and I do appreciate the fact that we do have that in common.
So let's kind of shift gears over to sports journalism. And, you mentioned that was the kind of turning point for you. You get started at the South Bend Tribune in 1993. You're covering Notre Dame football, but where does that big break come in with the Chicago Tribune? Was the Tribune always like your pie in the sky dream? This is where I want to be, because you were there for a long time, 17 years. If I'm, not wrong, but I mean, it seems like maybe that was the dream job and you finally made that. I mean, tell us about the journalism side.
When I grew up in a small town, we used to get the Chicago Tribune in on Sundays, or get it on Sundays, and I would read the columnists, and I wanted to do that. I was a sports writer, always wanted to be a sports writer, and so the biggest paper in my area was the South Bend Tribune. So when I graduated from Medill at Northwestern, I started there, and I really loved my time in South Bend. My son was born there. My wife and I lived there, and we were there for 10, 11 years. And I was a columnist at the South Bend Tribune covering Notre Dame, and took me around the country. Great bowl games, great trips. And then, frankly, I had looked at other jobs. I had turned down some other opportunities because I felt pretty comfortable in South Bend, some bigger papers that weren't better situations. And I had just started to settle a little bit. We had just bought a house and lived kind of near the river and in a great location. My son was about a year and a half, and kind of when you just accept the fact that, well, this might be okay, you got a newer house and whatever. And the out of the blue, one Friday afternoon, Dan McGrath from the Chicago Tribune, who was the sports editor at the time, called me cold. I was in the office. I took the call. He said, "Could you interview for the columnist position?" And I was like, "Yeah, when do I need to be there? By rush hour, I could probably get there by 6. But no, I can't wait. I interviewed for the columnist position. They hired Mike Downey to be the columnist instead of me at the time. And you remember Mike? Mike is a journalism legend and even a better guy. And working with him was a privilege. But when they didn't hire me to be a columnist, they came to me and said, "Hey, have you ever covered a beat before?" And I was like, "No, I'm pretty much just writing columns." And there's a difference. And this was a very competitive market at the time, a very competitive beat at the time. And I said, "No." So I thought that kind of disqualified me from whatever job they had in mind. They said, "Okay, well, we'd like you to cover the Bears. So how would you like to cover the Bears?" I was like, "Okay, when do I start?" So I didn't have any experience being a beat writer. And my reporting had been, kind of restricted to being what I did as a columnist. But I started there and was a beat writer for the Bears for 2 years. Did enterprise writing after that for 2 more, and then wrote columns and pretty much became the full-time in the wake of the news columnist in 2009. And overall spent 17 years at the Chicago Tribune and was fortunate and privileged every day. I loved the paper. I missed the paper, but I had to make the right decision at the time for my career. So in 2018, I left for the Score.
Right. How does, with having like a background in playing and being a former player, how does that influence your reporting? And also, I'm curious too, your candor with the players. Are they familiar that you played in college?
I never assumed that. And I think by this stage, probably not. I'm not there as regular. But when I was on the beat, I can remember a couple former Bears that you have to know your place, and you have to know what lane to stay in. And, you have to remember that as proud as I was of being, from Ball State, and I loved my college football experience, you walk into a locker room where, guys played at Georgia, Alabama, Washington, and we're all Americans in Nebraska. And I remember one time talking to one of the Bears tight ends and trying to ask a question about a type of route that I thought that he was running. And we called a certain route and what he called a certain route. And I described it like I was in college again and asking a coach about this kind of getaway route or whatever I called it. And he's like, what are you talking about? And I was like, well, this is what we called it when I played. And I'm like, he's like, well, when you played, you're not playing anymore. Basically, I never used that. I never really thought that it would be used to my advantage because these are NFL players, and playing in the MAC. All it did, guys, is I think it gave me an appreciation for what it felt like to be, frankly, embarrassed on national television or be in a situation where you could relate to the disappointment of getting beaten deep for a game-winning touchdown pass or dropping a pass in the end zone, as I did in the state finals my junior year of high school. These are kinds of things that on big stages, maybe not in the NFL, but you can relate to, like, okay, you need to approach this differently. You just can't dismiss it. You can relate to those feelings because sports is difficult to relate to what it's like to cover a guy running 4-3 at you on 3rd and 5 and breaking on the out route, but you can relate to the disappointment of losing or being the guy responsible for a loss. Those things are universal, whereas some of the specifics really aren't relatable.
So we're going to, the coaching staff of this current Bears team, a lot's changed over the last couple of weeks here. We're going to talk about that in a second, but I'm just curious, based on how long you've been covering the Bears for the Tribune and, now for 670, is there a favorite coaching staff or a favorite coach that you've gotten the opportunity to interact with on a regular basis up until this point?
That's a really good question.
If you say Eberflus, I know you're kissing his butt.
Yeah, it wouldn't be, Matt. I haven't been around him enough to really have that kind of rapport. I think that I would like him, though, only because of what I just described earlier. It was difficult because Lovie Smith and I had a very, contentious probably overstates it, but there were members of his inner circle that held me partly responsible for the reason that he was under such scrutiny and fire his final year. And there are even some members of his family probably that still hold me partly responsible for him, being fired when he went 10-6. So it wouldn't be Lovie Smith. The guy that I probably had the best relationship with, though, over the years, and I've been in Chicago, this will be 21 years next month. Probably John Shoup was the first offensive coordinator way back in the day. You guys probably don't even remember him. You were probably in elementary school. But John Shoup was the offensive coordinator, embattled, scrutinized, criticized. I got to know him and his family. I keep in touch with him and his family to this day. I looked at him. I humanized him in a way that probably at times, maybe looking back 20 years, might have compromised my objectivity a little bit, just because it's harder to criticize people that you consider your friends. I don't think that happened, but I was always aware of it because I liked John. I thought he was a really misunderstood guy, and I felt like he was a good dad, good friend, great guy, and a guy that the public really never quite gave a fair shake to. So I would say, oddly enough, John Shoup on the first Bears staff that I covered, because sometimes those are the relationships you remember the most and the longest, because they were meaningful at the time. And not necessarily somebody I covered, but the other guy that comes to mind is, I never really knew Dave Wannstedt when I wasn't here when he was the head coach of the Bears, but now I work with him.
Yeah,
there was not a nicer person in the industry, coaching or media. Dave Wannstedt would meet you and 5 minutes later want to help you do whatever. And his uncommon sincerity is something that I think makes him everybody's friend.
All right, now your least favorite. No, I'm kidding. We won't ask
we
for
may
that.
have covered that one.
Yeah. But let's look at these new hires, and we're all lifelong Bears fans on this podcast, and just curious of what this means for the offense. Obviously, we hire Shane Waldron as our offensive coordinator. We now have a passing game coach from Carolina, a receivers coach from DJ Moore's college years out of Maryland. And most of the Sean McVay coaching tree is kind of having an influence on these hirings. Is that what we can expect as a fan? Are we going to see a lot of getting the ball out quick, explosive receivers, explosive pass plays, or is it going to somehow always end up being a Chicago Bears offense that is dysfunctional and doesn't work?
Well, I think they're trying to get rid of the dysfunction, and they're trying to kind of streamline everything. And here's what I think the biggest takeaway should be. And I respect anybody's right to be, cynical and skeptical about the Bears. That's earned. That's appropriate. But in Shane Waldron, Thomas Brown, even Kerry Joseph as a quarterback's coach, but to a lesser degree. In Shane Waldron, you're hiring somebody who has done the job before. The Bears historically don't do that. And they don't do that, and they pay for it. And they pay for it badly. Luke Getsy was a creation by Matt Eberflus, by Ryan Poles, by the agent, whoever it was. Luke Getsy had never called plays before. And then you want to entrust him to call plays for the quarterback. You're trying to unlock his potential. And for 2 seasons, he struggled inconsistently. And I think that's the problem. What you have in Shane Waldron, and I think what you have in this staff, is experience. And you can lean into that. Eric Washington on the other side of the ball, he's not going to be calling defensive signals, but he's been not only in Chicago before, but he's been in the league for a long time. So I applaud the Bears for going out and getting capable, competent assistant coaches that aren't curiosities, that aren't going to be doing something for the first time. And that's experience that you trust. And frankly, it's experience that they lacked.
Yeah. Were these, how much did Matt Eberflus have a say in these coaches? Was this all Ryan Poles, you think?
No, I think it had to be Matt Eberflus. Look, I understand why there would be, again, questions about, hey, can you trust Matt Eberflus? He's said 5 to 10 assistant coaches in 2 years, and the last 2 guys left under really bad circumstances. Oh, boy. But, if you're going to bring him back, and that's, another larger, broader question. Mm-hmm. If you're going to bring Matt Eberflus back, you better trust him to hire guys that he can work with. And you don't want to give a guy people he can't, or is getting to know, or he doesn't feel good about during the interview, because that would be disastrous. and you'd be compounding one question over this decision to bring him back with another to saddle him with assistant coaches he doesn't feel like he knows. So as much as, there may be the presumption that Ryan Poles was, forcing this list on Matt Eberflus, and I think that you do wonder, some of these guys, I get it. Some of the guys on the list were maybe Poles guys, but the final decision probably had to weigh heavier with what Matt Eberflus wanted than with Ryan Poles, because he's the guy that he has to work with him every day. I do think in the final analysis, though, these Flus and Poles are joined at the hip. They've got the same contract length, I believe. They've got the same agent, and I think they're going to be aligned philosophically with the coaching staff.
It's just, I think it's interesting for all Bears fans to be like, yeah, we're all in on Matt Eberflus after kind of what we've seen as a results oriented league. Like, just we haven't been winning, and now just be like, all right, even let's give him more power. Let's let him pick his coaches. Let's let him. Is this going to then impact? That we've waited 25 minutes. Let's get into the draft. Is this going to impact the draft? Is Matt Eberflus going to have a say in who he wants drafted, or is that 100% going to be Ryan Poles' baby?
Well, I think it'll be 93% Ryan Poles. I mean, that's the general manager's job. The head coach's job is to prepare game plans, manage the team and through and navigate adversity and make those kind of decisions with his staff. The general manager's job is to give them the best roster possible. So the draft involves getting the players who are the best available at the spots you're drafting. So that's why number one overall to me, until they find something, egregious about Caleb Williams, is Caleb Williams. I don't think there's really that big of a debate when it comes down to the football question. The character issues, I even think that overstates it. If there's something that is a red flag in his background checks, yeah, you've got to address it. You've got to acknowledge it, and you've got to stay away from it. But barring that, if this is a football conversation, Ryan Poles is going to make the right football decision, and Matt Eberflus is going to be thrilled that he does. Who would not want to coach the best quarterback available this year, and maybe the best quarterback that's been available in several drafts?
Yeah. It's what made that coaching job, so attractive, right? And that's what everybody's been talking about. Well, how they got these big names. You look at what Carolina's brought. Nobody wants to work with Bryce Young, right? I think they hired a 32-year-old offensive coordinator that they said is not going to call plays. What is that guy doing? But the Bears got some big names, guys that have worked together that come from a great coaching tree. So I'm super excited about who they've brought in. And Dan and I have been pounding the table for Caleb Williams as well. So I hope that's the way they go. We did get one question from a listener, David, for you that we wanted to run by you. And it's, why do you feel that it's not okay to cut your grass with your shirt off in the summertime?
Now that's a very loyal listener. Okay. This is why, because not everybody is in a position to where they should be outside shirtless. If you work out, great. If you're a Planet Fitness member, great. If you've got nice little sand weights in your basement, great. But if you don't, and you've got the dad bod, or you're trying to look at the dad bod as an improvement, do not diminish the property value in your neighborhood or the cul-de-sac by cutting your grass shirtless. You're not doing your neighbors a favor. You're making everybody look away, and you're scaring the children. So that's
fair enough.
Why.
Fair enough. And then last question before we get you out here, back to the football side. How many trades do you think we'll see draft day with Ryan Poles? Is he going to be maybe Caleb first and then start compiling draft picks to build around? Because that's the counter argument with Fields, to build around him. Why not draft Williams and then trade down and get more talent and start building around Caleb?
I respect that decision. Last thing I'll say about this. I respect the position they're in, and people that argue that, you build around Justin Fields because you can get so much for that draft pick. You can get 2 1s and a swap this year and maybe a player. That's tempting. But if you had asked the Cincinnati Bengals, if you'd asked the Houston Texans, if you'd asked the teams that have elite quarterbacks and took advantage of taking those guys in those spots, if you'd asked this in Indianapolis Colts, even in retrospect, if they would have taken all those draft picks for Andrew Luck. No, they would have taken Andrew Luck. The Bengals would have taken Joe Burrow. The Jaguars would have taken Trevor Lawrence. You've got to have that guy. The Bears got to keep this pick to take that guy. And then you go from there. At 9, okay, if there's a run on quarterbacks and the fourth quarterback is, available and a team really desperate wants to move up to 9 to take whoever it may be, Michael Penix Jr., Bo Nix, J.J. McCarthy, whoever it is, then you're open for business. And Ryan Poles can wheel and deal and add picks and commodities and talent. But I would hold on to number 1. I would auction number 9. And I would make it a historic night because really, and this is how I'll end, the Bears are on the verge of something historically good. There's only 2 decisions. People can look at it however they want to look at it. I'm not going to tell anybody what to think. The cynicism is understood. But you've got a choice. You could either make a good decision, which is, okay, trade down, get picks, build around Justin Fields, win the NFC North in the next couple of years. You can make a good decision, or you can make a better one. And the better one is drafting Caleb Williams, in my mind, getting through the red flags if they don't exist, and drafting the elite quarterback that gives you a chance, not to just to win the NFC North and take the North, as they say, but win a Super Bowl. That's what you do with elite talent. That's why the Bears are in a great situation. They've got cap space, they've got draft capital, and they've got vision, and they have needed it. So let's hope this is the offseason. They put it all together. They certainly have the opportunity to do that.
All right. Cheers to that.
Oh, yeah.
David, thanks so much for coming on today. Again, he's the co-host of Mully Haugh Show from 5:30 to 10 a.m. weekdays on 670 The Score and host of NBC Sports Chicago's Football Night in Chicago. Thanks again, David.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Evan. Appreciate it.
Thank you. All right. And thanks again to our guest today. It is David Haugh. He is the co-host of Mully Haugh from 5:30 to 10 a.m. on the weekdays. You can also, that's on 670 The Score. You can also watch him on NBC Sports Chicago for Football Night in Chicago. Evan, how are we feeling after that little pump up? You can make a good decision or you can make a great decision. And, we're both Caleb Williams guys. So how do you feel about kind of that perspective from one of the, local media members?
Yeah, I'm fired up about that. I want more people to be saying things like this. Justin Fields, he's been fine. He could be good, right? If we had just the 9 pick, of course, you're building around Justin Fields. You're not trading up, giving up a bunch of assets, but you're in such a unique situation with that 1 pick, and you got a generational talent by a lot of people's measure that is sitting there for you to take, right? I mean, we're in such a unique opportunity here. I don't think we should be swinging to win the North. We should be trying to win the whole thing. We haven't won a Super Bowl since 1985. Right? It's the whole point. So I love to hear it. I think we need to get more people on that side. But that's been our show today. Thanks again to David Haugh for coming on and joining us. For Dan Slook, I'm Evan Bierman. You've been listening to the Domestic Draft Podcast. If you're listening on Spotify, don't forget to rate the show. You can find us on Twitter at Domestic Draft, on Instagram at Domestic Draft Podcast. Our website is domesticdraft.com, and you can watch the show on YouTube. Just search up Domestic Draft and drop us a sub. Thanks again for listening.
Cheers.